So I just want to back up a couple of things that he said that hopefully add a little more perspective. Maybe you've heard me say this before, but that word logos is a Greek word that usually gets translated word, right? And like when you read John, it's the word was with God, the word was God, the word became flesh and dwelt among us. This is the Greek word logos, but it's really like a Platonic philosophical idea. Maybe you haven't read Plato in a bit. I sure haven't. So just a quick reminder, Plato says that all of the Greek gods like Zeus and Hera are silly. Like that's a human invention and it's a soap opera because people are better actors than the gods are. No, here's the real nature of things. Everything that we see comes from what he calls the forms. So even though a Chihuahua and a Great Dane are like very different, they both have the form of a dog. Or a thoroughbred and Arabian have the form of a horse. The forms are like these kind of broader categories. They come from the virtues, and the virtues all come from the logos. And the logos in Platonic thought is the universal ordering principle, which is manifest in everything that is. So like the intelligent design is the logos, if that makes sense. So the logos became flesh. This is what John says. The intelligent design became flesh and dwelt among us. And when you hear a word like biology, usually you'll hear it as, that means the study of life. But really what it means philosophically is how the universal ordering created principle, the logos, is made manifest in living things. Geology is not words about the earth. It's how the logos is made manifest in paying attention to the earth. Eschatology is how the universal ordering creative principle is made manifest in the end. Not the end, and this is I was really grateful for what he said. It's not like how does it all end? It's the end of the world as we know it. So how is God going to be manifest in the end of the world as we know it? That's really the question. And he talks about Daniel and Revelation, but I just want to give you another example, which we also didn't read, that we're probably pretty, no, actually we did read this one. In Isaiah 11, the wolf will lie down with the lamb. That's the end of the world as we know it. It's not about the end of the world. There will be a wolf, there will be a lamb, they don't perish. But it's the end of the world as we know it when predator and prey are reconciled and trust one another. And that is how God will be made manifest in the end of the world as we know it. I hope that's a helpful companion to kind of what he was saying, because a lot of times we think, what happens when it's all over? And what he said that I hope was maybe new a little bit and also interesting is the Bible doesn't talk about that. The Bible just talks about how the world as we know it's going to be over, not when the world is going to be obliterated or what's it like when we die. There's not a lot of concern about the descriptive of that. There's the quality of that. The quality is about reconciliation. And in Revelation, there's all these gates, but they're always open. I don't know if you noticed that. The gates are always open. You could make that literal, oh, like in heaven, there's these gates are always open. Or you can think that the quality of that is that you have this city that's like the holy city, and gates are designed to decide who comes in and out. But the quality of the end of the world as we know it is, they're always open. So Peter with the keys, it's funny when you read Revelation, the key is like not in his hand anymore. Like it turned the lock and it stayed in the lock and there's no locks. That's the quality of God in the eschaton, in the end as we know it. I didn't mean to be too preachy about it. Like I hope that accompanies the video okay.
Well, when he talked about the end, he often, several times used the word prelude instead of the end, indicating, it's the beginning, not the end, if you will.
Yeah. What's interesting is that a lot of literature has been written, including like the Left Behind series, that have a different understanding of eschatology, not as the end of the world as we know it, but as the end of the world.
Right.
Which is a very different notion from what he presented. And I would suggest to you, when you read prophets, Daniel, Revelation, they don't talk about the end of the world. They just talk about sort of the transition between the world we know and the world that God is going to fulfill, but not like a time when it all goes black. I don't know if that makes sense.
Definitely, I think I'm feeling not real sure to think of my personal end versus the end. I mean, I'm not real sure when you refer to the end, is that for each of us personal end, or is it somehow the end of human life as we know it, or the end of the Earth as it rotates around the cosmos? I don't,
Probably all of the above.
all of them.
I think probably all the above. Yeah.
That's a great question. Thank you for bringing it up.
Oh,
And I think it kind of begs the second question: what's the Christian hope in each one of those different
Yes.
scenarios? What's the Christian hope for me, for my children, for humanity at large, for the universe? Because those might look a little different.
But the quality, for me, I'm thinking along your line, the quality of reconciliation, reunion is the same, I would hope, for me, as what's projected for the end
mhm.
of humanity. I don't know.
Well,
What do you think?
the I was a little, I don't know, just, it says here on the first page on 259 at the end of the, I guess the third, fourth paragraph, it says, what end did the Creator have in mind as the creation unfolded? If the end is to be consistent with the beginning, the end will be good, a setting of divine pleasure. I don't, you know, I guess I was a little kind of, I don't know, I had some question about that, because that is a consistency for mankind, but that may not be a consistency for God.
Mhm.
Say more. What do you mean about the difference between human and divine consistency?
Well, you know, we have certain kind of ideas that things have to be at the beginning and has to be consistent towards the end. But those rules don't apply to God. You know, I mean, we take, you know, whether it's Greek mythology or Roman world mythology, but Christianity, we take our own kind of attributes of who we are and try to create a belief system that will fit with us. So that we can understand the world and understand our mortality. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mike, when we read the prayer at the beginning,
Yeah.
and it starts out, when grim death doth take me by the throat. I don't see death that way. And I've come to feel that through being at this church, that death is not grim. the leading up to it maybe might be grim, but the death is not grim. And when it's
Hmm.
come to me, it's going to be beautiful. It will be heaven, it will be with God, it will be with people that I love that have gone before me. That it's not something to be feared or afraid of.
You know, I agree with that from the standpoint that I experienced. I wasn't present when my father died, but I arrived there like 3 minutes afterwards, and it was very, my sisters and my brothers said he had supper, and he said, that was the best meal I've ever had. And he said, I'm gonna take a nap. And the nap was the end. And and it was quiet. They said he was Maudie was the same way, Tim's mother. She just said, you know what, it's time for me to go. And she just closed her eyes. And it was that simple and yet that beautiful and that totally painless and free and easy and, you know. That was just
It's not always that way, but.
well, I guess that's just the way I've experienced it, and
But
it's,
I see it for myself, I see it that way.
yeah. I hope so.
And then life as I know it will be different.
You know, that kind of makes me wonder. In heaven, if I don't recognize my wife when I'm in heaven, then I'm not sure I understand heaven, okay? Because if we have no memory of being on earth, then I can't wrap my head, I can't wrap my head around that idea.
That wouldn't be heaven to you. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
Without,
Without the
Right.
memories and
Yeah.
the,
Yeah, if I have no memory of being on earth, then exactly what is heaven?
and of course, nobody knows because.
It'd be great if the Bible cared. The reason I think the Bible doesn't care is that there's no address of that at all. Sometimes, like, I think things that seem really important to us may not actually be that important. People get very anxious about where they're going next, and there's seminars about what heaven will be like. I don't know how those people know that. It's interesting that they think they do. I mean, good for them, but I'm not quite sure that that's like really a proper use of the word eschatology.
I don't think so.
quality, like you said, it's the quality of beginning, the new,
I think so.
rather
And
than the details.
I mean, I can hang my hat on that a little with more confidence, I think, for sure, than particulars. I mean, just to be totally honest, the Christian hope I was raised with is like you all get a harp and a cloud. And I was like, it sounds really boring. Like, will there be like different punishments in hell? That might be, I know that sounds terrible, but my teenage brain was like, maybe there'll be variety in hell. Cause like, I just don't know that I could sing just as I am for eternity and like not want to hurt myself. But you know, that was sort of like what we talked about when the little place I grew up, it was like, you know, you're just gonna sing songs forever on this harp about how good God is. And I don't know. I was like, are there options?
And I grew up, I don't know if it's South Texas Hispanic growing up, but for me, growing up amongst Spanish speaking people and my grandmother and my everybody, they talked about how when dying meant And I'm not sure if in Catholic school there was any explanation, not much of that, of what it's, other than that you go to heaven. But that was for them, for the people, was reconnecting with those people they knew before. Somehow there was going to be a revisiting, and where those people would be, it would be like really good. But that's,
I can remember my grandmother saying the same thing,
Really?
reconnecting with her husband. and her
yes,
sister
yes, yeah, that's,
Yeah,
So if that,
in North Carolina.
so if that doesn't happen in heaven, then exactly what is heaven?
Well,
And this is what I want to put a wrench in, if you didn't mind me saying, is a lot of when we talk about eschatology, it's like what happens next instead of how is God going to be manifest in the end of the world as we know it, so that we can start doing it now.
mhm.
A lot of the focus is as what happens next instead of how do we do that sooner than later. And I would suggest to you, anytime an eschatology is like, well, when this thing happens, it'll just be better, it'll be really great, it'll be really sweet, so I'll just endure till I get there, I think we've handled it improperly. The goal of it is if this is the quality God has in mind, why wait? And the reason I put that before you is a lot of times people talk about like, I'm gonna be with Poppy in heaven, and that's really, really sweet, right? Except you're also gonna be with people you hate. I mean, that's my Christian hope. And it's not always a good hope. Sometimes I'm like, God, I think I'd rather just like there be nothing when I die instead of me having to be with. I'm not gonna name names. I get you say that's gonna be joyous, God. I just don't know if I buy it. So how about just nothing?
Mhm.
And I think this is like part of the cognitive crisis is you don't just get a reunification with your spouse and your grandma and all the sweetness. I mean, look, there's things about my grandma I don't like. You're gonna be around that forever. Oh, but only the good parts. No, I don't think that's God's vision of how this goes. Because I think my understanding of like how of God is that God's able to enjoy things about me I don't even enjoy about myself. Now that's a riddle, but I'm supposed to be swept into that with other people. Apparently so. So I don't know if that means harps and clouds. I think that means a lot of like, ooh, conversion to me thinking that what God thinks is good might actually be good. Because a lot of what God thinks is good, I'm not too sure about. And again, here's me being, I'm just going to take the extremes, but it's, it's like, you want to spend eternity with Osama bin Laden?
No.
Well, he ain't going to make it there. What hope do you have? Well, I know the right answers. This is where it starts to become really weird, right? Like
Yeah.
only the good ones get there. Well, look, the good people I know got their problems too. Well, God's just going to take that away from them. Then they wouldn't be who they are. So this is where I think we get into like, this starts to get really, really tough. And when we paint a really small picture about what happens next and forget that, hey, like qualitatively, what's our invitation into how we live? That seems to be more important to me. Real big example biblically. Yeah, Adam and Eve were equal, but Eve's the one who ate the apple. So like, that's why men are the spiritual leader of the household, and maybe God will fix that later. Well, look, if that was so good, why do you want to wait for that? Like, let's do equality of the sexes now, instead of waiting for God to do it for us. Why don't we just go ahead and go back to paradise? Oh, well, because in the Bible we fell. Okay, well, if you say that's true, then don't you want to get out of the hole sooner than later instead of living in the hole?
Yeah.
well, people are dark skinned because Noah's son sinned and he cursed him. I mean, this is like a real, I hope you're not too acquainted with this idea, but it's a strong idea. That's what was behind the doctrine of apartheid in South Africa, that idea. So even if you read the scripture that way, why would you continue to want to live under a curse when you could reverse that curse here on earth and say, person with more melanin in your skin, you're my brother or my sister? To me, that's what eschatology is supposed to do, is say, if this is how it ends, how do we live into it now? I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, maybe this is gonna sound dumb, but I'm not real clear what the word eschatology means.
So the way he used it is, it's words about the end,
Okay.
or the study of the end. But he put the writer, not like when everything goes black and the earth blows up and the universe goes dark, but just biblically speaking, the end of the world as we know it. And we're supposed to feel fine, right?
It's a song.
There's a lovely song about that. I don't know most of the words because they're unintelligible, but
Right.
Is the hymn about New Jerusalem about that?
I think so. And this is this weird thing about Left Behind. Like, it's such a cool, tantalizing idea until you actually read Revelation. The New Jerusalem is on earth. So I don't know where our fundamentalist brothers and sisters got this idea that we should destroy the earth sooner so we can go to heaven faster, because the book itself says the home of God is among mortals. Not the home of mortals will be with God somewhere in a different dimension. I want to go back to death for a second.
Go back to what?
Go back to death. Because, we read this poem, right, which I think encapsulates our feelings. I'm just not sure it encapsulates like a good eschatology. I want to pair it with St. Francis's hymn, maybe all creatures of our God and King. Verse 6, all creatures of our God and King, lift up your voice and with us sing, hallelujah, hallelujah. And then there's like a sonnet about the wind and the moon, like all doing these beautiful things. And verse 6, which you don't always sing, is, and even thou, most gentle death, who waits to quiet our last breath, oh, praise God, hallelujah. You bring home the children of God. Christ himself that way has trod. Hallelujah. So there's this praise of death, not as an adversary, but as a creature that ultimately brings about the end of the world as we know it. Good theology doesn't always match my feelings. We live in the middle of the two. That's kind of what I think eschatology forces us to consider. There's our viewpoint and there's God's viewpoint, and there's a gap in the middle. And how do we kind of close the gap sooner? Probably we have to change, right? Words about death, sometimes people just die in their sleep. Of course, that seems very peaceful and lovely. Sometimes we see people, and look, I've been in the hospital, I've seen, well, it looks really violent and it looks kind of tough, but I just want to ask you, this is going to sound really morbid. You ever stepped on a roach and then maybe an hour later, you maybe didn't pick it up, but you noticed it like
Flopping around.
moved? And maybe you thought like, oh my gosh, that roach is really suffering. Or like, I can't believe it's still feeling. It may not be feeling anything. It could just be electricity moving through the muscle, right? Like, this is how muscles work. You introduce current and they contract. We don't even know what other people are feeling when they're dying in a bed. We don't know. Sometimes we look at somebody in bed who's got a twitch and we think that must be so painful. We have no idea if that's painful. That doesn't mean we shouldn't ask. What I mean is, we have a vision of what's painful for us right now, but when your body is dying, to introduce food and hydration to the body is more painful than withholding them. This is what hospice says. I believe that. actually, that when your body is shutting down, when you force it to take on nutrition, it introduces pain, not relief. I believe that. So I want to say, having been a chaplain, somebody taught us this, and I think it's probably right. Most people are more afraid of dying than they are of being dead.
That's,
I think.
yeah, they're
And what
afraid
we're
of the
most-
way they die.
That's it. And we're most afraid of, did it hurt? And I just want to be really clear. We don't know.
When
It
my,
might look tough, but we don't know if that's actually tough for the person. I was talking to somebody yesterday whose husband is in early stages of Alzheimer's. And you look, having made the journey, I mean, I don't know the answer, but I would tell you, living with somebody with Alzheimer's is harder for the person who doesn't have it than the person who does. The person who does have it, after a couple of years, they don't even know they have it. They don't know they have it. The first couple of years, they start to become aware, like, I'm just forgetting stuff like I didn't used to, I didn't used to forget. But there comes a threshold in which their brain is different. I don't mean pejoratively, I just mean it's different. It experiences memory and sensation, like even physical sensation, differently from their pre-Alzheimer's brain. It's very obvious when you spend time with people for a long time. It's painful for you, they repeat themselves every 30 seconds. They don't know they're doing it, so that's not painful for them. It starts to become painful when you say, you just said that, why do you keep saying that? Well, they don't know they just said that. So, as we talk about Christian hope, like in the in-betweens, I just want to bring it back to like the reality we're all facing, which is, it's a little mysterious.
when my sister was in hospice, she was dying of cancer. Evidently, the hospice people work really hard to get to know what fears the patient has, and my sister's fear was not being able to breathe. So they gave her a little tiny bit of oxygen to calm her fears. They were at a point where they weren't giving her food and they weren't giving her water, but this was to make her more comfortable, because that was a big fear of her. And I had never thought of that, that would be one of the ways in which they would make her end of life easier for her.
Yeah. And we all do this. I mean, how many of you have an advanced medical directive? I'm grateful you do. And if you don't, it's okay. But it's very helpful, because in some ways what we're telling people is, and I want you to really consider this, you're telling people how you want your care managed before you even know how that's going to feel. But I think most of us at the table, I mean, it doesn't matter what word it is you say, like for me, I don't want to be, like if I don't have a good outcome of success, I don't want to be artificially fed and hydrated. I've decided ahead of that point in my life that I prefer that to being on a feeding tube and an IV. Now, I don't know how I'm going to feel that. I don't know, but I've made that decision already. This is what those things are meant to do, right? And I think most people who make that decision say, well, nobody wants to starve to death. That's a terrible way to die. But even if that's painful, I'd rather do that than be artificially propped up and die from cancer or something else, whatever it is, right? So we already try to weigh out what's painful or what isn't ahead of time. this may sound really tangential, but I hope what you're hearing is like, we're in the middle of this kind of gap. And eschatology is really meant for us to consider what qualities are at the end so that the gap can get closer, which is really like, if this is how it's going to work out in God's mind, maybe we could change our minds sooner than later. Biblical eschatology is less about what happens when we die than how we're invited to live. I think that.
Yes. Makes-
And I would say, as with all things, including marriage, if you have really, really tight expectations of what marriage is like, prepare to be disappointed. On the other hand, if you're open to qualities, prepare to be positively surprised.
It can be a lot of fun. This has become a real sad thought. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking, what we were gonna talk about, but it's hard. It's difficult things to think about. So you don't walk around every day thinking, well, let me see, what did I have, what am I gonna do about the last days? And we just recently actually met with an attorney about our wills. And so that was, it's not a strange meeting because we knew we were wanting to do it all that, and it was very nice and all that stuff. But it is a reality of life. And fact, and
You know, at some of my like most worked up moments of parenting, my wife would say, at the end of your life, what are you going to wish you had done?
oh gosh.
This bridge to the ground, that's what I'm gonna wish. Now, I mean, in the moment, I probably would have said something like that, but really at the end of my life, am I gonna wish I had burned that bridge to the ground? Or that I had been an ironclad disciplinarian? Or am I gonna wish that I had been tender? That's really what the question's inviting you to consider is, hey, if this is the last interaction you're gonna have, how do you really wanna leave it? I think that's what eschatology really is. And I don't think that's like a depressing thing. It's really living your life in reverse. It's saying, when I'm able to survey what I've done and what enjoyment or pride can I have? Not in the quantity of my accomplishments, but in the quality of which I engage the world. I think that's real eschatology. And yeah, in some ways it can turn really dark if you say, oh, I'm going to die, I'm not going to live forever. I guess it could become morbid, but I think it really is an invitation. Since nothing's forever, what do you want to put into this?
Enjoy life now.
That's kind of what I think. And then the qualities of eschatology are gateways into how we enjoy life, right? If people have to conform to what I consider to be pleasant for me to enjoy life, it's really not going to be that enjoyable for them. And honestly, it won't be enjoyable for me either.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, Charlene. But there's a little bit of a dichotomy here in how the scriptures discuss this subject. I mean, are we living heaven on earth? Or are we here, in your words, to endure, to fight the good fight, to hope for something better? Or as the Thessalonians said, God called us to live a holy life. So it's sort of, a little, which one are you advocating?
And you have to do both. I guess it sounds so simplistic on the surface, but I thought the very same thing you just said. But then you think, well, actually both happens, even if you just sit around. It's, you can't just sit around. Life isn't like that. So,
if you believe the other side is gonna be that wonderful, why not try to make this side better, more like you think it's gonna be?
Which I think takes not only work, but there is this,
Love it.
there's this like metaphor that you get in Ezekiel, where there's the valley of the dry bones, we just read it,
Mhm.
right? And I'll put a new spirit in you, which could also mean breath. Consider how you take breathing for granted. Like, you can in yoga, or at the end of the day, you might really think about breathing, but you don't think about breathing. You just don't. It's something you do. So think about how much work it would take to learn how to breathe in a different way than is natural and instinctual to you. I've tried this actually for a couple of months. I tried sleeping with my lips taped closed, so I would only breathe through my nose, because that's much healthier. And I tried running and only breathing through my nose and not through my mouth at all, because supposedly that's like much better for you in the long run. And let me tell you, after doing it for 2 or 3 months, I wasn't really any better at it than when I started, right? Because
Getting better at what again?
than when I started. I'm a mouth breather. Sorry, I'm a mouth breather,
Oh my God.
So it's shocking. And when I exercise, I'm also a mouth breather, even though like I've read this research that says like that's not good. Boy, it is so hard to change something, frankly, as habitual and subconscious as breathing.
In yoga, they'll do it both, let's say both
Did you
ways.
read the book Breathe?
I did. Hence, I taped my lips shut.
Oh, God.
Yep.
There's a book
Glad
called-
you read that book too.
Well, no, my sister is insisting on it, so why find about
It's interesting, but I would suggest I know I'm being a little bit comedic, but I just want you to really consider how much work it would be to change the way you breathe so that the new way became as natural as the way you're breathing right now. It would be really, really a lot of effort, reminders, practices to uphold you. So I would say, Herb, that like that's the discipline we're called to. Yeah, God's gonna give us a new way of breathing later into the world as we know it, but it does take a lot of discipline for us to really start to live into that now. And I think that's what the New Testament says. You didn't call it a fight. I don't know that I'm not fighting my body. I need air. I have to have it, but it sure feels like an engagement. Like, why do you keep doing it the old way? We know not to breathe out of our mouth. Quit doing it. There, you did it again. What's wrong with you? It feels like I'm my own adversary. Feeling, not true, but it feels that way. And this is how I hear a lot of the language that we get biblically, is that it can feel like we're fighting ourselves. I mean, consider what Paul goes on to say, right? The things I don't want to do, I find myself doing, and the things I want to do, I find myself not doing. We all know we could eat better. But man, food's so good. And then there's like, oh man, I just blew it. I know, I'll have some ice cream, right? Like, this is the kind of stuff that we do because it is so hard, even at the chemical level. I mean, consider that the foods we eat are engineered for you not to be able to turn them down. Chemists have done this intentionally, so you will keep eating.
Tim was. a
Restaurants like
conservative.
dim lighting, so that you will keep eating.
Yeah.
Plates aren't red. Weird that those cups are. It's because there's free refills. By the way, that doesn't even, But red is used to help you slow down. I don't know that it works. People still drink a gallon of Coke when they go to Pizza Hut, right? I mean, but this is like I don't want to say there's a conspiracy, but we're so saturated with the way that we're used to doing things that change is really, really hard. And I think that's what those kind of battle metaphors are talking about, and running the race and fighting the fight and that sort of business, because it can feel very uphill when things are engineered to keep us doing what we're doing.
I've been working very hard recently. I find that as I've gotten older, I've gotten less patient with service professionals who I don't think are doing what I think they ought to do. So you're very good at saying, well, maybe they've had a bad day, they've got things going on in their life that make them be incompetent, you know? And so I've been trying really hard to give people the benefit of the doubt. And if I can find a way to praise them on something like, oh, you have such a pleasant voice on the phone, you know? I'd like to sock you for the way you're treating me, but you have a pleasant, you know, and it is hard. It is hard. I still find myself getting angry at them. But I'm trying really hard to think from where they're coming from or what might be going on in their life and trying to make a difference and trying to compliment someone every day on something. I did that yesterday on the phone with an insurance agent. And she was like,
From an insurance agent.
she
That's
was
what
like,
our dads do. Our dads were insurance
thank
agents.
you. I said, you've been very helpful in explaining this to me. He says, well, thank you. I don't often get compliments.
And I would tell you, Susan, that like, I think I can say those things freely with a lot of conviction because I know they're right. However, I can tell you, when they happen to me, I go quick to incompetence or laziness or something else, right? And so please hear I'm right.
I
The
still
reason
do.
I say
I
them is
still
because
do.
I'm hoping to make a conversion myself.
Right.
And
I'm
hopefully if
trying.
I say it enough, it'll start to replace my old voices, which are very loud and very quick to react and say it's because you did this on purpose, because you don't care, because blah, 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 blah.
Because you weren't paying
Now,
attention.
when I make a mistake, or when a mistake happens that I'm related to, of course, I want people to give me the benefit of the doubt. Because I didn't do it on purpose. But when somebody else does a thing, it's because they did it on purpose. And I'll just give you an example. Helen, I'll tell you, I was riled up yesterday because I was sitting there donating blood, which takes 2 hours. And inevitably it happens. I go do this during the workday, and then like a lot of shit hits the fan. I don't even know what to say, but just things happen, and there I'm stuck there in the thing. And what do you know? I got news that 2 people died. And because I'm type A and I want to be good and I want to get the notification out, I thought, well, I'm here captive in the chair. I'm going to use my mobile phone and I'm going to send out the death announcement. Now, I've learned, make sure you look at the preview. I looked at that preview. It said Dave Matheny. I looked at the text. It said Dave Matheny. I hit send. The one you got said Janet Morgan. And in the text, it said Dave Matheny. I came back to the office. There were 10 emails telling me. They ranged from the subject line and the content don't agree to it's really inconsiderate of you to do this to people, to families. Now, I thought I was being considerate, sending this as soon as I could
And see,
and looking at the preview.
I'm not getting them.
It's because they're going to your spam or you,
No,
according to our system, they're coming to you.
just all of a sudden, I'm
Well,
not getting them.
Consider this a gift because
got
you
it.
didn't get the mistaken email. Now, look, I
Got it.
I even sent a third one that said,
You got it?
sorry, it didn't match the preview. And to be honest, there's nothing wrong with MailChimp, but anytime I don't use my desktop, this kind of thing. Now with Susie's that went out, it totally worked right. So I don't know why you did that with Dave and not with Susie. And what did I want? I want people to extend me the benefit of the doubt, of course.
Absolutely. You
And
got the message out.
in the intention. And I also get that this is really sensitive, but again, it's not for lack of trying. So if I could just hold on to that. When I'm talking to this person from customer service, I just don't want to. It'd be a lot easier if they were just lazy and whatever, than if they're just having a hard day or their software's not working.
It could be both.
But to be honest, and this is what I like about Brene Brown, she tells this story and she talks about her husband. She says one day to her husband, "Do you think people are doing the best they can with what they have?" And he says, "Yes, I think that." And she says, "But do you really? I mean, look at so-and-so down the street. Do you really?" And he says, "Well, here's what I would say. I don't know. But I know my own life will be better if I think they are than if I don't." Which is a little postmodernist. Which story do you want to believe, given that we don't know which one's true? And the answer is the one that will make you more compassionate and joyful. I think that's what eschatology is about. And it takes a whole lot of discipline to let eschatology reform ontology. But I think that's the point of it,
Ontology
the way things are.
today.
This is where I like the last couple of weeks, and I know, look, every preacher's got one sermon. Herb's told me this, you hear it every week. I'm preaching the same sermon. But I think like the tie-in the last couple of weeks has been like a lot of times we have a false ontology because we see from our own perspective, or we only see like a surface layer of things. We don't even always have real good peripheral vision, and we don't always like see underneath things with like that third eye. And I think biblical eschatology is about opening the third eye. I think. So maybe you were hoping I would talk to you about what tune your harp is going to be in when you get to heaven. I'm just going to tell you, I hope I don't get a harp. And I'm gonna like ask you even a more difficult question, and this is gonna sound strange as a clergy, but I'm gonna tell you a story first. I used to teach at a fundamentalist Christian school, and we had to sign a statement of faith to teach there, but rough. Anyway, principal son was in the math class, and I was supposed to do biblical integration, so I did talk about faith issues when I was teaching math. And I remember one day talking about like, hey, like, this sort of idea that like, hey, why wait for what God has in store? And kid says, 15, well, look, if there's no heaven when we die, what's the point of faith now? Because faith was a transaction. I pay now, I get my reward later. So if there's no reward later, why pay faith now? Because faith is asking me to do things. In some ways, I think he was right, but not the way he thought. I think the transaction system is the thing to toss out. But I would put before you, what if this is it? What if there's no cloud and no pearly gates and no harp? What if you die and your consciousness dies and then God does whatever with it? Like I don't want to say reincarnates, that's an Eastern idea, but like, like that's it. Would faith have any value for you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I would say yes. It brings
I
it-
have to say yes, because since I don't know empirically about the next thing, I do know this much. And again, other story, lady in Coronado, did I tell you this already? She put together a service summit for the diocese on her own. So she got all the churches to do this coordinating service 4 times a year, whether it was collecting diapers for refugees or whatever. I mean, layperson, no stipend, just thought we should serve together. Really good. She's on the bishop's committee, and I was razzing her one day about don't tell the bishop I said this or that, or, given your advanced position and your advanced belief, I know that's how you're on the bishop's committee. And she said, look, I don't even really know what I believe, but these are really generous people, and it is good for me to be with them. And that's what I believe. The church that raised me would have said that is a bad answer. There's not confidence and faith, but I can tell you, like, that's probably the best answer I could ever hear from somebody. I'm not really sure, but I know this is good for me, and I know this is good for the world when we do it right. Now, I'm not telling you there's no heaven. I'm not telling you that, but I am asking the question, what if there isn't? And what does that do to your faith? And what does that do to your hope?
Oh, well, we're not going to know that.
And since we don't know,
Yeah.
what does that do to your faith and your hope?
Well, it's, do it right now. Do the good stuff right now.
Right.
For me,
Enjoy the day.
Do the best you can
And,
and being kind to others.
and hoping the rest of the world catches on.
I do want to make sure I don't leave you hanging. I am absolutely convinced that whatever it is happens will be different than all of us expect. I'm totally 100% sure of that. And I'm 100% sure that if I trust God, it'll be better than I expect, even though I might be disappointed it wasn't what I had in mind.
Okay.
I think it's gonna be good, because from the time I was a little kid in Catholic school to now being here in your class, and listening to you lecture from a different religion, but not still basically the same concepts. It's a good thing. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be good.
That's a good question you ask. What if there, isn't life after? But so ask the same question. Let's assume there is. Then how can the end times influence what we do now? In a non-transactional way.
Yeah, and I think this is where I think it's a little bit weird that he says the two books to look at are Daniel and Revelation.
Yeah.
Because I think like you get this little sprinkles like the one we read in Isaiah about radical reconciliation. And like I said, I think that really challenges me to redefine what I consider good.
Well, maybe the answer is if we don't understand what a godly life is now, okay, or that maybe trying to understand what it is in the afterlife may help us understand what that means now.
I mean, I think we could all agree, wouldn't it be lovely if at the end of the day you thought, I didn't lock the front door and I don't need to. Because apparently the gates in heaven are just open all the time. So what would it take for us not to need to lock our doors at night? Right? Let's make that happen.
Wow.
That's kind of what I hear you asking, right? Right now you say, hey, it's a really good thing. You don't have to lock your doors at night. Oh, but somebody might come in, but I don't want to. Somebody might come into the heavenly city. We don't want them coming in. And God is intent on leaving the doors open. Well, but people could hurt you and take your property. Okay, so how do we manage that so that we're not afraid of that anymore? But the end result is we leave the doors unlocked. I don't mean in a cavalier way. I mean in a really transformational way, right?
I grew up in the 50s and we didn't lock our doors.
So did I. In a little town in South Texas, we didn't lock it.
We didn't either. My dad left the car keys in the car, in the air
You
conditioning.
know, it's this funny thing, and has anybody ever read Freakonomics?
Mhm.
Freakonomics has got some issues. This
Yeah.
Freakonomics is about correlations and causations and how those had nothing to do with each other. But there's like a couple of interesting stories in there. Like there's this guy who decides on the side he's going to sell bagels. He's just going to put them out at work because work didn't have any bagels. So he buys bagels and he puts them out. And it's, hey, if you take a bagel, it's $1 and just put it in the envelope and there's nobody there. It's the honor system. And they contrasted how often people took the bagel without paying in that system and how often people stole from Einstein Brothers bagels. And guess which one got stolen from more?
I'm sorry.
Einstein.
Yeah.
Because left to their own honor and unmonitored, people in general did the right thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that story.
No, I don't remember that one.
This is sort of an interesting
Yeah.
bit, right?
Yeah.
That like a lot of times what we expect and what we police becomes like self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So, and I would say that sometimes seeing is believing, but sometimes what we believe influences the way we see. And look, I gotta tell you, there's like certain types of folk who come around asking for money. I'm pretty jaded. You know, my first year I wasn't jaded. My first year was like, this is so real and like, this is great, I can do this, but I get jaded because people can't even fill out 2 pieces of paperwork when they want $800 in back utilities. My utility bill has never been $800 in utilities. Are you heating your home with your oven? Are you like doing nuclear fission experiments? How are you running that bill up? Jaded. Because, and I try hard to fight this. I have to fight this, right? Like you just can be skeptical about, like, you see people, you say, hey, I get it. They come back 2 or 3 weeks later, they want something else. It's like, how do you not let that permeate the way you look at people who legitimately need help and are willing to ask? And a lot of times what we believe influences what we see in front of us. I think our Christian hope is like, how do we kind of soften some of that out, right? I don't mean, how do we get more taken advantage of? I don't think that's our Christian hope. I think the question is like, how do we get out from underneath the fear and anxiety so we can sort of have a different vision of other people and ourselves?
We need to, maybe this sounds naive, but you need to begin to, I think, to begin to really believe, and I'm thinking of myself when I was a principal that in inner cities, that things are gonna go well, that the kids would be in on time, there would not be a fight, no kid would come in with a gun and shoot a hole in his foot, which how this happened to me one time in my school. Yes, he brought a gun to school in his pocket, he played with it and it shot a hole in his foot. But, you know, at the end of the day, at those times in those inner city schools, I had wonderful things happen, really, you know, wonderful things. One day I went to the doctor's office and the nurse came running out and she said, are you Mrs. Cavula? Yeah. She said, I just had a patient who said his son was in your school and you were the best principal. And he's behaved well, he's gotten married, he's got a house, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I don't know who this kid was. But this nurse said that dad thought you were the best principal ever. And anyway, it's just a silly story. But
No, it's a lovely story, right? And I think you've got real experience kind of akin to the movie Lean on Me, right? Where these schools people have given up on and what the kids don't have. I was talking to Vicky about this yesterday. They don't have hope. And Vicky was talking to me about this like in a very like high level, is that this is a major problem with people who grew up in systemic poverty is they don't have hope.
Yeah.
And so when $10 comes their way, since tomorrow is hopeless, spend it now. There's no discipline in saving because there's nothing to hope for. So you see somebody who you know is on the edge financially and they're drinking a $7 latte. It's very easy to say like, that's what got you in the hole. But where they're coming from, they're always going to be in a hole. So you just take what you can get now. Now, and I don't have that mentality because I was raised with, it wasn't just with discipline, I was raised with hope.
Yeah.
That
Just-
you,
And just telling someone, don't buy that, don't spend $7 on that because of this, teaching them doesn't change that mentality. It's a systemic mentality. It's
Yeah.
the community, it's their whole history and their whole future.
and to be honest, when your family's emphasized education, they didn't say it's so you will be blank one day. It's because there's hope in education. We don't know where it's going to take you, but we know it'll take you somewhere better than if you don't. This is like a hope of the middle class. We hope for education and we trust that. But if you grow up in a family that doesn't have the hope of education, then why bother? There is no future for me. So why should I do this? Frankly, often dumb school assignment. They often are dumb. They often are dumb. But because I had enough hope, you just do it so you can move on, right? Whether you see the benefit or not, it's gonna get you somewhere. But without that conviction, there's nothing there, which is again, what I think eschatology is there to say is, nope, this is going somewhere. It may feel hard. It may feel like a dumb assignment right now, like a thing you just have to turn in, but it's going somewhere.
It's how to work the system so that you make the system work for you. That was one of the ways I worked with my high school acting out kiddos was, yes, that rule is dumb. But the system is, if you follow this rule, they're not gonna watch you do other stuff. You know, teach them how to work the system so that the system works for them and they can
and I think-
graduate and get out.
I used to think that more with my kids, similar kids like we're talking about not so much about work the system, but be part of the system in a positive way and be part of it and take part in it. Remember, I took the kids to, and some group of kids to the alley one time. And one kid came to a play and at the alley. So this kid comes running in and he said, Miss Cumberland, do you go to places like that all the time? And I said, well, honey, not all the time, but I do go to places like that. And I take, and what I want you to know is there are places like that in the world. And so what am I gonna do? How do I get there? He says. I said, you stay in school. I know it sounds like you go to church always, but you stay in school, you work hard, you attend your classes, you pass your grades, you go from grade to grade to
And
grade.
with those little ones, you can
Yes.
build the hope.
Yeah,
By the time I got them in high school,
I had them in junior high, so they were
Yeah,
going to high school.
yeah. By the time they're almost adults, the system's against them, and they've already got that mindset of there's no hope with the system.
But you know,
I'm glad you got them early.
but you know.
Yeah.
When you take a look at these systems that we have,
From there,
which keeps African Americans without hope, with thousands coming up from Guatemala, or
Yeah.
they come up there with hope. And we do everything we can to destroy that hope.
Yeah, no, there's no, I'll tell this story real quick, but when I had inner city kids too, also from Mexico. And I was in Kansas and was in a school and I said to a kid one day, you know, what's the difference between you being here or being in Mexico? And he said, Ms. Pabula, it's real easy. He told me in Spanish. In Mexico, I don't eat. Here in the school, I eat.
Wow.
So sometimes it's that.
Well, and it's, please.
I had a student in particular I was thinking of, and there were like, I don't know, 4 or 5 kids and a grandmother, and they lived in a house trailer, parked on a lot, okay? And eventually I found out they couldn't afford to pay the lot fee. But they had the biggest TV, flat screen TV I ever saw. The kid wore Air Jordans. And the way the counselor explained it to me is they want to fit in to their peers. They don't want to appear to be less than their peers. So they spend the money on those things that will help them fit in, even if they can't put food on the table.
And we all know money can't buy me love, but we
Right.
conveniently forget it. And I would say, coming back to the dichotomy, I think you introduced, Herb. I mean, I just think about part of this, I think, has to depend on the quality of God in the end, which is bridging us to what we're gonna do next week, which is about judgment, right? So I think if the quality of God in the end is God's gonna weigh you on scales, and if you're found wanting, it's really bad, that is going to inform a different pattern of life and a different way of looking at other people and a different way of looking at ourselves than if we say, I don't even know how it is that God could possibly enjoy me, but I think God does. And I think we live in between. And so look, I'm just going to tell you, and I think this has nothing to do with their personalities. I think this has a lot to do with like the way we are socially stratified along gender in this country. But I just want to give you an example from my own upbringing. Probably if I told you the worst thing I could do to my mom is if I told my mom I was gay. I'd have to be gay, and then I'd have to tell my mom I'm gay. It would absolutely like crush her heart. Absolutely. And I think my mom, whose faith, here I am on video talking about this. I think my mom's faith would say, like, I'm probably going to hell for that. God hates me for that. It's a choice. It's wrong, that sort of thing. It became very clear to me in my 30s. My mom would love me anyway. And it was not clear to me in my 30s that my dad could get over that. And I think the reason being is they have a different eschatology about what God will do. Actually, it would probably tell you identical things about how God will treat gay people later. But I also know my mom enough to know she would do everything in the middle of her broken, crushed heart to stay. And I think because of my dad's view of eschatology, which I think is more masculine, like do it this way or the highway. I don't know if he could make that turn in himself. I mean, I don't know. You never know this side of things, right? And there's also ways that women and men are accustomed to talking. And my dad definitely had the harder edge, which was more, frankly, 1940s masculine that he grew up in. I'm not telling you who's right or wrong. What I mean is I saw in the way that they spoke different ways of embodying this eschatology, both of which were afraid, frankly, of what God was going to do to people who didn't do the right thing. But then what happens when that came home? Again, I don't know. Like I can tell you, it's this funny thing that I learned, from my parents. I've told you this before, but one of the best things my mom ever told me was about being a priest. This is not the life I wanted for you. But I see that people appreciate what you're doing, and I'm happy for that. My dad had a way of speaking to us that was very critical, but when he spoke of us to anybody else, it's always positive.
Yes.
Could not say a kind word to us, would never say a negative word about us. I don't know if you grew up that way, right? So my dad was like, don't be a priest. It's a waste of your life. It's a waste of your gift. And then lo and behold, I found out from other people he knew, it's like, oh, you won't believe, my son is doing all this sort of stuff, It's so there's nothing wrong with the guy. I'm not telling you a bad story of my dad, but what I mean to say is some of that informs how is it that we live. And what I think every parent wishes, I think what every kid wishes is they really knew the tenderness of their parents' love in their worst possible moment and their best moment, right? And to know that my dad would be no more proud of me when I failed a race than when I just ran my worst race ever than if I won the gold medal. I think every kid wants to know that.
But you ran the race.
So, right. So I'm getting that now. We're all trying to grow up. And I would say probably my parents had similar, rough abrasions in their own parenting. And so then the Christian hope is, so if that's what we want, why don't we just do it? Because it takes a lot of discipline. Because it takes a lot of work. Because look, I don't want to encourage my kid to settle when maybe if I said something different, it might push them to be something even more enjoyable. I mean, this is the tough thing about parenting, right? You want to love them exactly where they are, and you love them too much for them to stay right where they are. And how do we confront that?
Well, I think that's profound. See, to understand that our view of eschatology affects what we do now is like Renee Brown's husband who said, I want to believe this because I want to act this way now.
Yeah.
So interesting thought of if we want to act something, be something, maybe we should think of eschatology in a different way.
I think that's really going to show up next week. And again, I know I've talked about this and it's clearly something really important to me, but I think the way we understand God's judgment then and now influences the way we judge ourselves. influences the way we judge our parents and our children and our siblings and the people who worship at Gloria Day and the people who run a TV we don't know. And I think what a lot of times what we do is we take our own, frankly, broken conception of judgment and we project it onto God, which makes it even stronger and more wrathful than where we started. And maybe we're invited to think about the way God's going to judge, frankly, so that we can judge each other differently than we do. I hope so. That's my Christian hope.
Christian.
Okay, so let's talk about judgment next week, shall we?
Okay.
I know it's Holy Week. We'll make it a Holy Wednesday when we talk about judgment.